Hello, welcome, bonjour, bienvenue. I made this particular video in response to a user request. So if you have an Excel task that you'd like me to help you with, please consider leaving a comment. The task I was specifically asked to facilitate in this case is the comparison between two large data sets to determine if there's any differences between them. And you can imagine how a conflicted copy of a data set might happen when a team of people are working on a common file, and how difficult it might be to find any differences between those data sets if you are limited to manual comparison. But we are not that limited. We have Excel to help us. So in this module, I'll show you two ways to use Excel to make the task of dataset comparison much easier. And both of these methods will compare data sets of fictitious student enrollment data that I've shown on two different sheets, and I've named these sheets Data 1 and Data 2. So the first method relies on the use of conditional formatting. We're going to highlight cells in Dataset 1 whose content is different from the corresponding cell in Dataset 2. So first we're going to do a little formatting. Let's go to the View menu and freeze the top row in each data sheet. And now we're going to sort both data sheets by the same criterion. And this is an extremely important step for data sheet comparison. We want to arrange the data ranges the same way so that it's set up for a cell-by-cell comparison. So I'm going to go to cell A2, Control-Shift down arrow, Control-Shift right arrow to select all of the data cells, and then navigate to the Data menu, Sort. These data have headers. We're going to sort by fictitious student ID number based on the value from smallest to largest. Now we're going to go to Dataset 1 and sort them by exactly the same criterion. We select them all. We sort according to the headers, specifically according to fictitious student ID number, cell values smallest to largest. Now both data sets have been sorted in the same way, and we can compare one cell to the other. So let's use conditional formatting to highlight which cells in Data 1 have content that's different than the corresponding cell in Data 2. So first I select all of the cells to which this formatting is going to apply. So I select cell A2, Control-Shift down arrow, Control-Shift right arrow to select all the cells in the data set. Then I type conditional formatting, new rule. I'm going to use a formula to determine which cells to format, and that formula is the following: equals not, and the not function was first presented in a different video on logic, open bracket, and now I'm going to select cell A2 on dataset 1, and I want this to be a relative reference, so I'm going to type F4 until it toggles to a relative reference, equals the corresponding cell on data 2. So I can click data 2 and then navigate over to A2. And you can see that the formula now makes a comparison between cell A2 on datasheet 1 and cell A2 on datasheet 2. Make that a relative reference. And if it is not true that these are equal, then the formatting will be applied. What formatting? Well, we can specify that here. Let's make it really easy to see by making the text bold, making the text red, and making the cell a bright yellow color. That should be annoying. Yes, it is. So close that, and you can see many cases where the cell has been highlighted because the content differs from one data sheet to the other. So please note that by keeping the cell references in the conditional formatting rule relative, cell A2 is compared to cell A2 on data 2, and then cell B2 is compared to B2 on data 2, A3 to A3, etc. If we'd left the comparison or the reference absolute, then everything would have been compared to cell A2. Now, the second method goes one step further, and in this method, we'll create a new sheet to prepare a kind of difference report. So on the lower tab, I'm going to click on the plus sign to add a sheet. I'm going to drag that sheet to the end. Then I double click the text in order to name the sheet differently. Let's call it diff report. And to prepare this sheet more quickly, I'm going to go back to Dataset 2, and I'm going to highlight or select all of the header titles by typing Control-Shift, right arrow, Control-C, back to difference report, cell A1, Control-V to quickly paste all of the headers. Now I'm going to add a little formatting to this report sheet before I populate it. For example, I'm going to freeze the panes to freeze the top row, and I'm going to define the limits of this report table by selecting the cells A2 all the way down to A101, and then typing Shift right arrow to select all the columns of the table. Now I'm going to the Home menu, and I'm going to color these cells in a very light gray, and I'm going to add grid lines so I can see the cells. Now this formatting has defined the limits of my difference report, and now I have to use a formula to populate it. So let's get to the heart of this method by writing a formula that will populate the cells of this table if and only if there's a difference between the content of the cell presented in the two data ranges, data 1 and data 2. To do this, I'm going to go to cell A2 and type the formula if the content of data 1 A2 does not equal the content of data 2 A2, then fill the cell with the following text. I want to show the two values and the word versus in between them. So I want it to display the value in data 1, and then I want to join that to text. I use the ampersand to join to text, and the text is going to be quote space versus space end quote, ampersand to join to the value shown in that cell in datasheet 2. So that's what it will show me if it's true that the two cells are different. Now, if it's false that the two cells are different, that is, if the two cells are identical, then to simplify the appearance of the difference report, I'm going to ask Excel to simply fill the cell with blank text. Now when I close the function with a close bracket and hit enter, I'm returned to the cell where I entered this formula, namely cell A2 on the difference report. So now that I've finished the function, nothing has appeared to happen, but that's because A2 happens to indeed be identical on both tables. So let's drag copy this formula all the way over to column R. And then we're going to drag copy this row all the way down to row 101. And I can tell that's the limit of my data table because of the formatting that I applied earlier. So now we can see that some cells are populated. Our formula worked. In cell I-80, for example, the report says that in data 1, the cell says F versus P in data 2. So there's a discrepancy between the tables as to whether the student was full-time or part-time. In cell P73, we can't quite read the output, but we can change that easily by double-clicking the right side of the letter P to automatically adjust the width of this column to accommodate the content. So this method prepares a report of the non-identical data that has to be verified and corrected in the two tables. And incidentally, because this difference report is automatically updated, the report cells would actually disappear. They would be filled with blank text when the values in the two tables are corrected to be identical. So it serves as a kind of checklist of which cells you still need to fix. And when the two tables are finally identical with the correct values, the difference report would be completely blank because no differences would remain.